So without taking much of time, we would like to go into our next session, which is actually a leaders trialogue. And I'm happy to introduce our moderator for this session, Jaspreet Singh, Global Lead Financial Health, UNCDF. He'll be joined by Dr. Chintan, Vaishnav, Mission Director, Atal Innovation Mission, NITI Aayog, Government of India. Along with him, we have Ms. Surina, Shukri, CEO, Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, Ministry of Communication and Multimedia, Government of Malaysia. Atal Innovation Mission is the central apex innovation body of Government of India, and MDEC is the apex agency of Government of Malaysia, which is kind of made to establish Malaysia as the digital economy hub. Yeah, Jaspreet, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Raki, and thank you so much to my previous panelists as well, for sharing the thoughts on some of their practical experience. Thanks, Surina, for joining us on this conversation, and Dr. Chintan. Dr. Chintan, if you can hear me.
I can hear. I can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. So, and I think Raki well introduced you. In terms of the what Surina you are doing, and Dr. Chintan, the work that you are leading in India. I'd like to kind of straight away, maybe go to some of the questions that like to kind of pose to you, and rather just from sort of ground rule, we like to make this a little more conversational in terms of that. I, as a moderator, will not be only the one asking. Maybe we like to learn in terms of from you, in terms of not only the work you are doing, but also things that you like to ask from your Malaysian counterpart, and similarly, Surina, for Dr. Chintan as well. We heard in the previous panel the entire context of how to really ground in the innovation, at a country level. What it really takes to make innovation workable from different dimensions. We talked of technology, partnerships, importance of financing, the role of government and policy making in all of this, right? And you two are basically the lead central agencies in your respective markets leading and driving innovations. Maybe my first question to both of you is that, as an innovation agency in your respective market, how do you measure the success of your work? What does success look to you, as an agency, when you will kind of look at, in a 2 years time frame and say, okay, we have done a good job. We know that we started this journey at some point, and we have taken the market in our country to a certain height. Maybe you can start with Surina if you want to go first.
Thank you very much. And so good afternoon, good morning to everybody on this call. I'm really excited to be here. I was listening on to some of the other panelists before and really inspired by some of the conversation to see all the stuff happening all over the world. Your first question, how do we measure success? So it's interesting. MDEC as an agency, we're actually celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. We were formed when there was no ICT industry whatsoever in Malaysia. Basically, the Prime Minister then had come back from Silicon Valley and realized, oh, there's something with this ICT thing. We got to do something about it. And so that's how the vision was born. And so now, from a big picture standpoint, your question, how do we measure the progress that we've made over the last 25 years? Number one, it's just by virtue that there is an industry in the country already today. Today, if you look at 2020, the statistics, the digital economy accounts for 20% of the overall GDP. And we have at the very beginning, relied on, an influx of talent expertise from foreign investors. Now we actually have companies of our own with that. And in fact, happy to announce that just last week, we announced our very first unicorn for Malaysia. Of course, nothing close to what India is having right now, but at least, it's something that we can look back. And so for me, what this demonstrates is that it's the critical mass. Because I think that then when we think about innovation in general, like just now, Nikita was talking about all the hubs in Africa. And so I think a lot of it is still like the critical mass is still not there yet. So at least from our standpoint, we're measuring like the critical mass that's required to continue to drive the next phase of innovation. In this case, like how do you get the other 80% of the economy to be digital? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, digital is the economy. Technology is going to be, infused throughout all of the economy. So how do we measure? So number one, you're just looking at the overall contribution to the economy. And now it's really all about adoption. And so we're going to be measuring ourselves going forward from here on, especially when this next phase is all about democratization of digital, democratization of innovation. So what is that overall contribution to the broader economy? And we've set goals for that. That's top line. There's many other things, but
I think that's really useful, maybe, and that allows me to pose this question to Dr. Chintan as well, because unlike, MDEC's journey, which was primarily to drive the digital economy in Malaysia, right? The AIM Atal Innovation Mission, looks at innovation a little more broader and, a little not agnostic to one technology or, one way of doing it. So how do you look at it, Dr. Chintan, because AIM relatively is a very young, agency in many different ways, and you have seen, this journey carving out yourself. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Great, thank you, Jaspreet. And it's nice to meet you, Surina. And also, it was great to hear the panelists before. I mean, really, truly very inspiring, actually very educational also. There are several things that I hadn't heard about. So you are right, Jaspreet. The context is for Atal Innovation Mission is different. Of course, that is not to say, I mean, there are people who look at specifically at sort of digital India type of initiative, but the Atal Innovation Mission's idea is to create a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship across the nation. So that's our mandate. Now, this kind of work in pockets or in a more focused manner has happened before the Atal Innovation Mission came about. So Atal Innovation Mission came about over the last 5 years. But Department of Science and Technology, Department of Biotechnology, they were already doing work in sort of technology-oriented, science-oriented startup work. There were some private players also dabbling here and there and so on. But I think what Atal Innovation Mission has come to do is it is broad-basing the idea of innovation and entrepreneurship in the country. So in other words, not only strengthening the science and technology-based innovation, but innovation entrepreneurship in general. Similarly, we are also not only thinking about, say, universities and the industry level innovation entrepreneurship, but also introducing maker spaces in schools. So for example, we have 8,000 tinkering labs in schools all across the country. So that has begun to provide a very different way of learning and a creative expression. In terms of the measurement, I think in terms of the measurement, we are at an early stage, but if you imagine it as follows, that the first question is the infrastructure for innovation. This is, where you would have your opportunity or access to being able to innovate. On top of it, there is the capacity to innovate. So this is the human resource question, right? As to, can you be trained? Do you have mentors? Are there people who can efficiently run such outlets? Are they generic outlets, or are they specialized in health or agriculture or whatever? That's the second layer. The third layer is the creative expression itself, as to, how much creativity. I mean, the creative potential of the nation is immense. So how much of it are we able to harness? That's the third question. This is the question. We have very narrow ways of measuring it today. So we talk about patents and number of startups and jobs created and all of that. So they're all fair. I mean, but they're very narrow. I mean, we have to acknowledge that it is really fundamentally changing a person. If you are a school child who didn't have the ability to make your turn your idea into an artifact and take your artifact into a business before. If somebody has reduced the transaction cost of doing that, that really fundamentally changes you. I mean, you will go on to do things, very different things. So I think that part we don't measure.
I think that's very interesting, take. Means, what Surina was talking of in terms of, really measuring in terms of the GDP numbers and, trying to basically convert those, aspects of work into some real economy numbers in a way. And I think what we're hearing from you is that, it's a journey basically in terms of, how you look at measuring it today vis-a-vis, how you'll measure it tomorrow, going forward. Maybe, kind of, building from there. We heard in the previous session as well, while it is important to kind of create this infrastructure, the, hubs and the network, right? We also kind of heard towards the last, in terms of the importance of the private sector, the role of private sector actually, catalyzing some of this, right? Beyond, when governments kickstart the process, but then, private sector has to take it up, to really scale it up and, drive that momentum. What have been some of your learnings in your respective markets in terms of, role of private sector? What hasn't worked, what hasn't really worked? Where you think, private sector needs to be much more proactive in terms of, coming forward and working alongside with government of some of these initiatives. We can reverse the trend if you want. Yeah, Surina, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a big believer that the private-public partnership. Now, before people used to say public-private partnerships. Now I like to actually say it's private-public partnerships because we really need these partnerships, and we really need private sector to help lead. Why is that? I think one of the big reasons is just from an execution standpoint, because private sectors, they're much more well attuned to executing, building, and they're more commercial in that regard. So that partnership is quite important. Certainly on our side, one of the things, certainly during the pandemic time, we've doubled the number of private sector partnerships that we have, just because we rely on private sector to be the scaling mechanism. So you have an initiative, but we may not have the best distribution means, and so how do we partner with the private sector to actually do that? For example, the banks, the telcos, the e-commerce companies and whatnot. So that part is really important. At the same time, government actually has a very important role too, and which is where I think private sector, as we continue to, the areas that we would love to see private sector be involved and engage more, is an idea that I call it's inclusive innovation. Because most of the time today, we know like the first ones to be innovating, leveraging technology, it's all these, the sophisticated startup entrepreneurs with tech backgrounds and whatever else. But we know, if you don't focus on some of the other traditional areas, for example, you'll have development that's imbalanced. So it's really, really important to have inclusive innovation. And so that's where government actually plays a very important role to remind private sector to say, hey, you got to do, you got to have inclusive innovation. So how do you make sure that your innovation benefits the farmers, the fishermen, the micro SMEs and whatnot, because that's really required as well. And so it's a reminder of the private sector to leverage that. And government plays the role also to help drive the adoption side of it. Because oftentimes private sector, they're very, very good at coming up with the new solutions, the new ideas. But if the market is not ready to adopt, then that's not going to work either. And so their government, this partnership between private sector and public sector, government can help be that trust layer to say, hey, everybody, innovation is good. Hey, everybody, look at what the private sector is doing, and let's embrace the solution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
No, thank you so much, Surina. I think you just kind of hit that spot of making innovation more inclusive. And I like to, actually get on with that with Dr. Chintan, especially from two aspects, Dr. Chintan, that given the size and the demographic landscape of Indian market, which is, every state is so different, right? How do you see that, this entire thing evolving? But then how do you ensure that, innovation is really being done for the last mile that we're talking of over here, right? Because we often see innovations happening, or rather it's a very in the buzzword. A lot of people talk of innovation and customer centricity and everything, but we really see it really trickle down to the people that for that who should really matter. How do you think that could be ensured, and what is the role of private sector in your opinion kind of driving it?
Yeah, so no, this is a very important topic. I mean, India, as you know, well, let me submit to you with all the humility that I can, that we are the champions of inclusive innovation. So because we are faced with the predicament of catering to the entire spectrum, of really poorest of the poor to some of the richest of the rich. So really you see it all in India. And I also have to say that I see a tremendous amount of compassion in young people to want to do something about it, and which is really a big blessing. The question is, can we give them the tools and the support to do it? But many want to do it. To me, I think the question of sort of innovating for the last mile is really a question of innovating with the last mile, because they seem to they know their problems much better than others would ever know. That's the first point. And many of them are creative enough to actually create their own solutions also. What they have is they have the ingenuity to come up with a solution, but they don't have the wherewithal to take something that is a rough prototype into a production grade solution. That's the part they don't have the wherewithal for. So how do you create an innovation ecosystem where you can innovate with the last mile, right? And for us, you asked a question earlier, Jaspreet, that if I were to think about one thing that I'd like to do in the next 2 years, right? Did you ask that earlier? Yeah.
No, I did. Yes.
Yeah. So to me, the answer to that, I'll come to private sector in a moment. The answer to that would be to open up India's innovation ecosystem to all languages of India. Today, if you want to be an innovator or an entrepreneur in India, you would have to be reasonably proficient in English in order to even participate in the innovation ecosystem. Now, we all know that creativity has nothing to do with medium of instruction. Otherwise, people who wrote in something other than English will not win the Nobel Prize in Literature, right? So we want to decouple, because today India, like only 11-12% of India actually speaks English, that too as a second, third, or fourth language. We don't have hardly any first language English speakers, right? So why are we teaching innovation in English? So that's the inclusion that I'd like to see in 2 years. Now, the private sector bit. See, the private sector, this is all in some ways, when it will all work out, it will be the private sector that will drive things, right? They will be the prime mover. Yep. We're not here to anchor it forever. We are here to enable it for private sector to be able to do it. Now, I am already seeing that there are certain types of ideas. If you had them as an entrepreneur, you would not come to any of the incubators because it'll be too slow for you. It will be really only those ideas where the risk is large, the market is not very well formed, you have the fear of falling in the valley of death, the space is slow, whatever. Those ideas you will come to the incubators for today.
Yeah.
Right? Even those ideas, if we can begin to de-risk and create markets for, private sector should take it. It's we're counting on them.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Surina, do you have something that you like to really ask Mr. Chintan about, in terms of how
I agree with that. Like, private sector ultimately is the one that's going to need to lead. But this whole how do you make sure that it's inclusive? Because like translating to many different languages. Like no one's going to be automatically motivated to do that. That's where agencies come in. Government needs to step in to help enable and catalyze those things.
Right. I agree with Surina. I mean, I think today government has to be there because it's not inclusive. Right. I mean, we do know that markets have not served everybody equitably, right? There are some pockets where things work beautifully, and there are others where there's very little to. So I think, yeah.
No, I think on that note, it's really important what you both mentioned of, making it inclusive, and this language as a barrier, which has to be kind of brought down, because creativity can be anywhere. Maybe I'll kind of, close it with one last.
Can I ask a question of Surina?
Sure, please.
Just because I understand Malaysia so little. I want to, my question is, what forms of exclusion do you see in Malaysia that you would want to make inclusive?
So one of the big parts of it is like funding. So right now, when you talk about early stage funding for entrepreneurs, for example, a lot of that it's still exclusive because it favors, for example, VCs will only invest in like hyper growth companies, which may not necessarily be developing products that serve all, and so there's this whole aspect of funding. That's one. And I think that as an element of it, you see that not just in Malaysia, but in many other countries too, where like who's developing solutions for microcredit with like very small returns and all this stuff. So that's one area where we're developing solutions for the masses. That's why things like partnerships with UNCDF, that we have a challenge every year to help develop inclusive solutions for areas that are underrepresented. So that's one. And then you also have different areas of, like different pockets of population. So more often than not, like you touched on it. Typically, innovation, at least today, it starts around, it's the big cities. It is the folks that go overseas, they come back with these ideas and they're innovating. But there are ideas that are outside as well. And so we need to make sure that development is all across. It's not just in the big cities. You never know where your next idea is gonna come from. So, and whether it comes from a young person, an old person, a woman, a kid, we have to make that, the search for innovation needs to be inclusive from all places, the source of it.
All of that is certainly true for us.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, both of you, for sharing these insights. I think this is important. The practical ideas that they present in terms of how to kind of really make it inclusive. And I actually have set away for also another next panel, which is actually going to talk about it in a little more detail and look at it in terms of the context of agriculture sector, in terms of how to really make it inclusive. And to the point that even Surina was making, that funding itself can be a big problem. We'll kind of hear from that panel in terms of how to really start looking at it in a different way altogether. So with that, I'd like to thank both of you. Sorry, Surina, you want to say?
I was just going to add, like, because you touched upon farmers, so this is an example of a traditional area. Sometimes it's not so much, it's not just it's funding. Sometimes it's just overcoming that confidence, because sometimes if you've never innovated, done something before, you don't know that you can. And so that little bit of just that initial hand-holding that's required gets somebody over that first hurdle to just try. And we've certainly tried that approach with some of the programs that we have. Our Ladang program, for example, was all about working directly with the farmers to say, no, it's not as intimidating as you think. It's not as hard as you think. And once they get started, then their journey continues. So helping that initial handholding, because you just require that little bit of patience up front to get people, the ones that are excluded, to get included.
Building that leap of faith absolutely. No, thank you so much for that. Dr. Chintan, last word?
Can I,
before we close the session,
while all of these international people are on this platform, I'd like to say that, there was, in Kunal's presentation earlier, there was a wonderful conversation of how a startup going to a different country, etc., can be helped, can find help. I'd like to also say that even at public policy level, there is a lot of work to be done to ease the journey of a startup. And I think there's a good bit of cross learning that is possible between nations to do that. I can give some wonderfully vexing examples of it, which I won't right now. But if something can be done at that layer also, alongside the startups and the incubators and the markets and all that, that would be wonderful because it can move the needle in a big way.
Absolutely, to absolutely your point, sir. And I think the entire purpose of this program is actually to, maybe test and enable those cross-country collaborations and see, how to kind of really ground it and, commercialize, in different markets, for all of the customers. With that, I'd like to thank both of you for taking time out, and having this conversation with us. And we look forward to having you for the rest of the session as well. And with that, I'll pass on the floor to Raki. Thank you so much, Surina.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.